Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving right into a topic that honestly pretty much every single one of us can relate to. So do me a favor and mentally transport yourself back for a second. Put yourself right back into that universally terrifying memory. You know the one. You walk into a dead quiet room. The desks are perfectly aligned in straight little rows, and the air just smells like cheap paper and nervous sweat. You sit down, put your pen on the table, and the room is so incredibly silent you can actually hear the clock ticking and the people around you breathing. And then, there it is, the teacher's shoes on the hard floor, going step, 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 handing out test papers like some kind of intense movie soundtrack.
The teacher gives a little smile and says, "Good luck." But in your head, you're literally thinking, "I don't need luck, I need another week," right? We've all had that classic exam face. You're half awake from pulling a desperate all-nighter, clutching a lukewarm coffee, just frantically trying to hold on to a formula you stared at 5 minutes ago. We have all been there. We've all pushed an absolute mountain of information into our brains at the very last minute, desperately hoping it just stays put long enough to write it down. We spend years, sometimes decades, operating inside this high-pressure academic bubble.
Which brings us to Section 1, the exam room reality.
You see, we spend our entire youth in that reality, chasing grades, taking tests, and trying to be the perfect obedient student. And then, abruptly, we graduate. Real life taps us on the shoulder and is basically like, okay, that was fun, now go talk to angry people, solve unpredictable problems, and make complex decisions in real time. It is a massive shock to the system. Suddenly, knowing how to pass an exam doesn't mean we actually know how to operate in the real world. And that's really the trap of traditional education. For years, we're taught to sit still, listen, and essentially copy exactly what the teacher says. We're completely spoon-fed. We're handed carefully measured spoons of information, but we never actually have to cook anything ourselves. We cram, we memorize long texts, and above all, we're deeply conditioned to avoid mistakes at all costs. Because in an exam room, a mistake drops you from a pass to a fail. But real life? Real life is entirely about making a mess, making mistakes, and figuring out how to fix them.
Let's move on to Section 2, Book Smart versus Street Smart.
Now, to be fair, exams aren't entirely bad. They do teach us discipline, they force us to meet deadlines, and they prove we can retain basic information under pressure. But they really only tell half the story. And that brings us to a crucial divide, being book smart versus being street smart. Look, being book smart means you're the student who always gets top marks, writes the flawless essay, and perfectly ticks every single box on a CV. You match what the system wants. But then you place that same brilliant person in a situation where they have to, say, lead a totally disorganized team, or handle a furious customer, and they just freeze. Their brain is desperately searching for a multiple-choice answer that literally isn't there. Why? Because they lack street smarts. Being street smart means you are strong with the messy stuff. You know how to read a room, manage people's emotions, and adapt on the fly when things absolutely do not go according to the textbook.
So, how do we handle this? That's Section 3, Facing the Skill Gap.
When we step out of the classroom and realize our book smarts aren't enough to get us through a random Tuesday at the office, it can trigger a massive wave of anxiety. If you've ever felt completely lost in a job despite having a wall full of impressive certificates, I want to validate that right now. You are not alone, and it absolutely does not mean you aren't smart. It just means you're facing a very common hurdle, known as the skill gap. It's literally the empty space between the exam practice you got and the life practice you actually need. Take a story from our source material about a student who always wrote perfect A+ English essays. Incredibly book smart, right? Had the vocabulary of a seasoned novelist. But one day his teacher asked him to stand up without notes and give a basic 2-minute speech. Despite knowing the language perfectly in his head, his hands shook, his voice shrank, and his mind went completely blank. He couldn't string a basic sentence together on his feet because there was a massive skill gap between his test-taking ability and his real-life communication.
And you know, this skill gap often builds into something even deeper. Imposter syndrome. Because of this gap, a lot of young professionals enter the workforce looking fantastic on paper, but internally, they're panicking. The source material shares this really powerful anecdote of someone sitting in their very first corporate meeting. They had top university marks, but sitting in that plush chair, listening to confident colleagues casually throw around industry jargon, they felt incredibly small. They felt like a lost kid playing dress-up in an adult suit who just accidentally wandered into the wrong room. That right there is imposter syndrome. It's that exhausting fear that someone made a huge mistake hiring you and that at any moment you'll be exposed as a total fraud simply because you're suddenly being evaluated on real-life mechanics instead of memorized facts.
But don't worry, there's a fix. Section 4, Building Real-World Skills. Here is the fantastic news. We do not have to stay stuck in that imposter feeling. The skill gap isn't a life sentence. It's literally just a transition phase. We can deliberately build those essential soft skills, things like teamwork, empathy, and problem solving. We bridge this gap by shifting our focus from paper to practice, and we do that through hands-on experience. You just can't get this by cramming the night before. You get it by being entirely inside a situation, making a complete mess of things, and trying again. Our sources give some incredibly relatable examples here. Think about working your first shift in a loud, busy cafe. At first, you're terrified. You're taking orders way too slowly, dropping change, and the espresso machine sounds like a jet engine. But over time, through sheer repetition and yes, making mistakes, you learn to stay calm and unexpectedly kind with an angry customer right in front of you. Or think about a new teacher. Their shiny degree gave them all the theory in the world, but the real learning happens when they have to adapt on the fly to 30 exhausted students who just want to go home.
The cool part is, the things we learn in the classroom can actually translate to the real world if we just look at them from the right angle. These are what we call transferable skills. They're the underlying muscles we develop while we think we're just doing schoolwork. Take group projects. We've all suffered through a messy group project where no one agrees, right? But when you learn how to mediate that conflict and explain an idea simply to uncooperative classmates, that's a transferable skill. You're going to use that exact same skill later in corporate management or, honestly, even negotiating with a toddler. When you adapt to the sheer panic of an unplanned pop quiz, you aren't just recalling facts, you're actually training your nervous system to handle high-pressure questions from a future boss. And when you practice the immense patience to sit through a painfully boring 2-hour lecture without checking your phone, you're building the exact discipline needed for high-stakes customer service disputes. You carry these skills with you everywhere. You just have to recognize them.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, Redefining Your Education. As we pull all this together, I want us to completely redefine what the word education actually means. It is so much bigger than a wooden desk and a red pen. We don't have to choose between exams and real life. We just need to put them in their proper places. If you take away just one thing from this explainer, make it this incredibly freeing truth. An exam is just a tool. It's like a hammer or a passport. It helps you open a specific door or land a specific interview, but it absolutely does not decide who you are. A test score only measures what you remembered on one specific day, in one specific room, under highly artificial conditions. It cannot and will never measure your kindness, your courage, your creativity, or your resilience in the face of genuine real-world challenges.
So, what's the game plan? Well, it's all about balance. Step 1, yes, absolutely study and prepare for the exams you need to move forward. Do the work, open the doors. But step 2 is where the magic really happens. Actively seek out hands-on experiences. Join a club, volunteer, take a weird part-time job, or just start striking up conversations with strangers. Put yourself in situations where you do not know the answer. And step 3, grow those transferable soft skills step by step. Closing the skill gap is a compounding process. Every awkward conversation you navigate, every time you have to figure something out without a textbook, you are building immense career confidence. It is perfectly okay to learn the hard way. In fact, it's required. That's how the skill gap closes, one messy, authentic interaction at a time.
Which brings us to our final thought, straight from our source material. I want you to really think about this for a second. Which real-life situation, maybe a difficult conversation, a chaotic part-time job, or a massive mistake you had to humbly fix, taught you more than any exam ever could? Your exams are just one small, tightly controlled chapter of your story. The unpredictable real-life moments, those are the rest of the book. So keep putting yourself out there, keep learning by doing, and keep building those street smarts. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.